My name is Yasser Sulaiman. I am the founding director of the Center of Islamic Studies at the University of Cambridge. It is my greatest pleasure to bring to you this video, which accompanies a report that we have done at the center in 2014-2015 about conversion to Islam amongst men in Britain. This report builds on a previous landmark report which dealt with female conversion to Islam in Britain. That report has been downloaded over 150,000 times. The present report brought together about 50 male converts to Islam in Britain. They came from different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, geographical and national backgrounds. And they have dealt with a number of topics that are of enormous importance, not just to converts and Muslims, but also to society at large. The report is based on an extended project. The participants came to Cambridge over 3 weekends. They talked about issues of concern to them. They dealt with those issues frankly, openly, but also with a great deal of trust in each other and also in the way that this report is going to be received. The report does not give a definitive statement of conversion to Islam in Britain, but we hope it will be a good contribution to a topic of great interest nationally and internationally. This video is not a replacement for the report, which I hope you'll be able to read and to engage with. But the intention behind this video is to bring some of the seminal thoughts and ideas that have been discussed in the report, but also to introduce some of the participants face to face to you. I hope you'll be able to enjoy this video and to bring it to the attention of friends and colleagues.
Many people ask me why I'm a Muslim, and they say you don't look like a Muslim, and that invariably leads to a debate about spiritual journeys, because everybody is on some sort of spiritual journey, and I explained something of mine from my childhood as a young and very, very sincere Christian boy, and then losing that particular faith and then going really on a search through world religions. By marriage I'm a caste Hindu, and so there's a lot of Hindu philosophy and thinking within my behaviours, and then some 15 years ago I reverted to Islam, or I converted to Islam. And when you're on a spiritual journey and you're searching, if you're lucky, and by the grace of God, you can finally come home. And because a lot of my drive was via the Sufi path, was via the poetry of Rumi and Hafiz and others, when I finally did Shahada, I really felt at home. I felt that's where I should be. And then since then I've done a whole range of things in relation to education and Islam, and that's where I'm at home everywhere, but I'm most at home within the Islamic faith.
My journey to Islam really came about through a period of searching and seeking through all the different spiritual, religious and political traditions, but especially the spiritual and religious traditions. I was not happy with my understanding of the world and the creator and the meaning of life. I was also not happy about the social and political state of affairs around me as a young man growing up in the south of England, and I was really wanting to get sort of some answers, because none of it made sense. I believed in God, but Christian theology didn't work for me. It just didn't work, and I was put off by it, and I wanted to look at churches and so forth, and I wanted to look at other religions. So I did a lot of meditation. I went to Buddhist retreats and spent time doing silent retreats and practiced Vipassana meditation. And when I looked later, as a believer, having done all those retreats and so on and so forth, I became very drawn to Sufism because of the theistic schools. That was the one school that was sort of speaking to me in the same words, but using theistic language, same words as Buddhism. So then Sufism and the poet Rumi really were important to me. But I also had some barriers to coming towards Islam because of the kind of all the issues, political issues around it, all the confusions and how and the sort of doctrinaire stances and the conservative stance, the Wahhabi and all of this, and the Sunni Shia thing, and all of that just confused me. So it wasn't until, although I'd embraced Islam to extent through Sufism, it wasn't until I met my wife that the door could be unlocked.
I suppose my journey into Islam and becoming a Muslim is a bit different from maybe some people in the UK, just because of where I stay up in the Highlands of Scotland, and there aren't really that many Muslims here. Before I became a Muslim myself, I mean that took some time, but I never actually met a Muslim. So it was strange because it was only after I actually started practicing Islam that I knocked on the door of the local mosque. I didn't even know there was a mosque, and said hello, what to do next. And they were able to sort of take me along the path a wee bit before that. But to get to that point took me about 18 months, where I was by myself. And it all started because, come to Islam, I heard the azan, the call to prayer on holiday. So I thought I'd try to find out a bit more about it. So I started to read the Quran in English, just a translation I picked up in the bookshop here in Inverness. So just reading that, I started to pray. Thoughts going through my mind, just analysing my life. As I was doing that, I wasn't coming across any problems with what I was reading in the Quran. It was drawing me more and more in. I found it really powerful to read, but I thought there'd be a catch there somewhere, so I read it 3 times just in case, and there was nothing there that gave me any problems.
I feel one of the interesting things about embracing Islam, at least for myself and many others that I've spoken to, is the issue of almost losing sight of your identity at times. So you embrace Islam, and many of the Muslim community, naturally being born Muslims from different parts of the world, they may kind of bring the cultural preferences and elements to your teaching. So what that does is it kind of creates this almost a schism between your old self and your new self. Over the years, maybe just meeting older Muslims from all backgrounds, teaching you to be more comfortable with yourself and to look at Islam in a holistic sense, that helps you kind of almost recalibrate with who you once were. And one of the brothers at the actual symposium mentioned something quite profound, that over the years you eventually almost become who you was before, just maybe with some slight additions or subtractions. And for me personally, that's something that I've gone through. I went through a topsy-turvy experience, and then over the years I've become essentially who I was before. Maybe I'd like to believe maybe more moral, have better ethics, maybe treat people differently than I used to, but essentially still the same person, into the same types of films, types of games, still read science fiction, everything else I'm into before. So that's something important for me.
I think lots of converts have to be quite, not everybody, I wouldn't say use the word brave, but they have to be fairly confident or sure of themselves, because you're making a big change in your life. You're putting yourself up potentially to sort of ridicule. And I remember my family were quite concerned that I shouldn't start dressing differently, because the neighbours might talk, and it's quite private sort of people. They didn't want to have to explain. But I would wear a little hat on my head, which meant that the neighbours thought that I converted to Judaism. So sort of slightly more acceptable, possibly. So yeah, and I used to wear an Arabic scarf around my neck, and just things to kind of almost like to identify myself, not necessarily to provoke people to ask me questions, but to sort of make it clear I've made a change, and wasn't fearful of how people would react. But yes, it's quite unusual back then. It was around the time of the Rushdie affair, so there was some controversy about Muslim communities and some hostility. But by and large, I didn't experience much of that.
Well, I actually think that, in the first place, British Muslim is a misnomer. I think we're British and Muslim. The passport says what nationality we are, and that generally there's nothing in that about being a Muslim. So I don't agree with the idea or even the concept of a British Muslim. I also think that it actually puts a nationalistic qualifier on being a Muslim, almost making us a subset of the Ummah, where we are in some ways because we're Muslims in Britain. And I think that's the crux. We are Muslims, and we are Muslims in Britain, and therefore we are British and Muslim, or Muslim and British, whichever way round you want it. But I went to Saudi Arabia and I was there for 23 years. Was I a British Muslim in Saudi Arabia? Was I a Muslim in Saudi Arabia? Or was I British and a Muslim in Saudi Arabia? And I can't agree with the concept of integration, because there are aspects of Islam, the practice of Islam, which set us apart and will always set us apart from the rest of the community. Not a question of dress. It's not necessarily a question of what we eat, but it's the way we behave, and the prayers, fasting Ramadan, things like this. How are you going to adjust to integrate into a community when you can't eat while they're awake in some months of the year? And I mean that literally from sunrise to sunset. In the long summer months, that may be as much as 18 to 21 hours. In which case, the rest of the family, if you're with a family that's not Muslim, aren't up or gone to bed, and you're not eating all the time that they're awake. So there is this concept, how do you integrate under such circumstances?
So my family's response was quite positive in comparison to some of the brothers and sisters who I know that have also taken Shahada. There was an element of shock from my mother, but it wasn't outwardly expressed. It was more something that I would hear from others, that she was concerned or not sure as to why I became Muslim. My older brother as well was also concerned, because at the time it was 2002 when I took Shahada, a year after 9/11. Obviously there was a lot of negative propaganda and a lot of negative connotations being associated with Islam. So there were some, even some of my extended family back in the Caribbean and in America were concerned and wanted to know why I'd become Muslim and why I'd come away from Christianity. But it wasn't hostile. It was more intrigue, as opposed to being banished from the home or being, treated as the black sheep. And I guess a lot of that had to do with my behavior as well. Thankfully, I didn't follow an extreme view of anything, so I didn't give anyone any major concerns. But still intrigue. Unfortunately, both my mother and my brother passed away, so I wasn't able to. Able to really. They're not able to see me during this part of my journey to see that it was a positive change and a positive move that I made in my life. But I do know some people who have had very negative experiences from their family not associating with them purely because of becoming Muslim.
I'd say my family, growing up, always allowed me to be open-minded. So I've never thought of myself as a closed-minded type of person. They always taught me to be welcoming to anyone and think about things freely. So I think that did influence me to the age where I started thinking about religion and things like that, to be able to explore rather than just be set in my ways. However, when I did tell them that I'd become Muslim, it was a big shock and brought out hidden prejudices and took a while for things to settle down. But as time goes on, it just becomes more normalised, and the more they see that I'm still their son and I've not changed, apart from my faith, the more they can understand and just cope with my decision.
A number of things were happened to me when I embraced Islam, 20 years plus. It was a very challenging time. It was an experience in my life I wouldn't forget about, where I did suffer physical abuse from my family. They did try to, they did do emotional abuse, etc. as well. And it was a very testing time, because what you find, even with myself and other brown converts, it was to do with, it always goes back to the issue of partition. India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, that's all what people focus in upon in terms of parents. And then they say to us, oh, we're the only ones who actually embraced Islam. So try and challenge the whole concept. They believe that we became brainwashed, which happened in my case. My relatives thought I became brainwashed. With me, I basically, I was just given the ultimatum. I had to get out. That's what my father said. Gives out the religion or gets out. And this was like a journey that we had to remember. There's something that was quite, I was 18 at the time as well. So I had to leave. And that was after having an evening of being beaten up, basically. But then a year after, my father passed away, and there was an expectation that I had to fulfill all the Hindu rituals. So I was the only son, and I said I can't do it. Which then in itself, it became a challenge as well. But I know from that time I would have preferred to have a lot, more support from the Muslim community at that time.
I often joke with people that it's a bit almost like coming out as a Muslim, and I've discovered a lot of people that have concealed this until later stages. I was exposed as a Muslim to friends and family inadvertently. My parents took it hard. They never came to my wedding to my present wife. I also was subject to some ridicule at work, which now I look back on is actually completely unacceptable in the modern world. I was ridiculed for my prayer times, and I was ridiculed to my face by people that I thought really had education, should have known better. As a white man in modern Britain, I'd never come across the feeling of being in a minority before, and that actually quite shocked. Becoming a Muslim as well was the coup de grace to a somewhat failing marriage at the time. And I was surprised at how, by taking my faith, I'd crossed a boundary that you really weren't allowed to cross in people's minds.
Well, the thing about the learning part of being sort of new to the deen is that there's a growing kind of, I don't know what to call it, an orthodoxy, or because it seems to have become that, but the sense is that there's an awful lot of book learning involved, and plunging into sort of learning Arabic and this kind of thing. And as much as that may be what suits some people, that's not really, I would say, necessarily particularly suitable generally. That's not something that we push people towards. But what we do have here, and it's well known, is a strong culture of learning, which, as I was saying earlier, that is part of, in my view, part of the kind of sense of readiness to become Muslim that one needs to keep that desire to know alive by practicing it. One has to relearn how to behave, how to speak to people, how to sit, how to eat, how to marry, how to educate and raise one's children, and how to interact with other people in such a way that it works for everyone. And these things aren't things that, they're not theoretical. There are precedents, historically, in the deen. And so if there's a learning to be done, it's a kind of familiarity, a familiarization with those precedents.
So first of all, I would say go slow, right? The Islamic tradition is ancient, it's vast, and it's better to approach it like you would martial arts than necessarily going to church. It's something that you want to be able to grow in with a progressive practice. So the small things done regularly are better than the big things done once in a while. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, whoever tries to take this way on in one go, it will overwhelm them.
I converted in Swansea, but I moved to Bristol quite soon after that. So the people that had introduced me to religion, I was separated from them quite early on. And because I didn't have those kind of connections and things in Bristol, I kind of drifted into, let's say, slightly dodgy groups, very highly politicised groups, let's say, which shaped my understanding of the religion, and I was very lopsided, I think, for a good few years, overly focusing on geopolitical issues and not very much on learning really about my faith and concentrating on sort of spiritual matters. Then I became even more sort of austere and strict, became quite judgmental, and again that was because I had a very narrow understanding, and it took time to move out of those circles, and it was only really through sort of reading and exposing myself to more kind of greater variety of scholars and opinions and ways of thinking that I sort of moved into sort of orthodox Sunni Islam, and allied myself with the Hanafi school, and that's sort of where I've been most comfortable.
In answering the questions, what is the support that those who have embraced Islam and converted may need, there are many, many facets to what they may need, but the essential thing is the one of support and mentorship. Taking on a religion and changing your viewpoints can be difficult for everybody, but for individuals who maybe come from difficult circumstances and backgrounds, having a support network around them is critical and important. One of the things that we do in the organisation that we do in supporting Muslims is make sure that we hold a monthly event where individuals can come together as new Muslims, as converts, and they can share a meal and share experiences. From there they can build relationships and then support each other outside the framework of that month. It's important that the individual gets proper structured Islamic foundation to start off with, so maybe attaching a mentor with them to support them in the early part of their transition is critical and important. There are many, many barriers that are out there that they may come across: isolation, loneliness, family, negativity from the media, work colleagues. But again, building a good framework for the convert is critical and important, and inshallah the transition will be easy for them, and the support provided will establish them with a great footing in becoming a Muslim and becoming part of the wider Muslim Ummah, inshallah.
So I think it's important to have structure for new Muslims. My own experience was I became a Muslim and then I moved to Singapore and lived there for the first 3 years as a new Muslim. And Singapore has a very structured organisation called Darul Arqam, which is all about converts and convert care and the early parts of knowledge that can be imparted upon new Muslims, and a flexibility around the type of knowledge that you want to gain. You know, they will specialise it for your own path, but there's a very basic beginner's course in Islam as well, and as part of that programme they give you a couple of what they call befrienders, which are people that will just help you as a new Muslim, really, not just with the course, but also with any questions that you have or any issues that you might have integrating Islam into your lifestyle and into the expectations of your family and your background. So I think that's something that
I got a lot of value from, and something that I think definitely there could be an opportunity to bring that type of program and that type of structure to the UK.
As for the Norwich community, what makes it particularly effective as a place for new Muslims is in that it's born out of that kind of gathering of people who had become Muslim, were expecting a transformation, expecting things to change either inwardly within themselves and or outwardly in terms of how one lives in the world. And so you get a gathering of people of that sort with that kind of expectation. Then, you know, with a bit of luck and a bit of, you know, sort of continuity and so on, then it does provide that sort of interim period where people with that kind of expectation can actually be with a sense of progress and development, without, in a way, you know, falling into this quite easy trap of wanting to change everything right away and turn the world upside down and you know, sort of restructure the whole of existence. I mean, so in that way, one becomes aware that one just needs this place where one can continue to feel that one is being true to the step that one's taken.
So one of the things that stood out for me at the symposium was the presentation on convert Muslims within the prison system. So the high percentage, and also one of the key things they highlighted was a lack of infrastructure. So there's no system in place to transport these new Muslims from their prison environment to one where they're maybe integrated into the Muslim community. So one of the things that was mentioned was that they're kind of ostracized for having been former prisoners, and so they have nowhere to turn to, and the irony is that they end up going back into that same criminal lifestyle because there was nothing set in place for them. The other thing that I thought was important that was mentioned was there's a lack of representation of there's a lack of representation of the convert community in terms of the chaplains, the imams and so on and so forth. So they don't necessarily have somebody that they can talk to, they can confide in, not in a kind of any dismissive way. But of course, if you're from a certain background, you can understand a certain people more than another. So with the convert community, there needs to be imams who can understand where they've come from, their background, their heritage, the troubles that they're going to face when they go out of the prison, trying to integrate back into their families. So these are things that need to be understood, and so therefore, from those two perspectives, it was an eye opener to hear about the actual situation of convert Muslims within the prison system and what needs to be done to kind of help them integrate into society as a whole, the overall society, and then back with their families, and then actually becoming part of the overall UK Muslim community. And that was something very important for me.
So my experiences with the heritage Muslim community have also been varied. There's been a spectrum of responses in that respect as well. And ultimately I'd have to say that it's again positive. I mean, my wife is from the heritage Muslim community from East Africa. I have two beautiful mixed heritage children who are also heritage Muslims now, right? So positive in the sense that I'm married into the heritage Muslim community. I've got mixed heritage children. There has been some negatives. So sometimes you might find that provincialism and sectarianism can be a challenge to converts. And these, I think, sometimes are the biggest threats to people embracing Islam, having a sustainable practice, that I think they should be allowed to explore their life as a Muslim without the pressure of old debates about territories, whether that's geographical or religious. So there's been, yeah, like the same, a spectrum of responses, overwhelmingly positive.
I've been very fortunate in that but where I have been living for the last 22 years in Cambridge, and before that the other places I lived in London and in Kent, I've always found the Muslim communities very welcoming and incredibly helpful, and great generosity and kindness always, and never sort of pushing me or shoving me in any particular direction. So I have a great debt in relationship to the Muslim community in this country. I think their generosity and their openness has been wonderful as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Okay. So marriage, I don't think it hits converts any more or less than it hits somebody who has had it hanging over their head their whole life. You know? But I think the way that it happens or it occurs to us maybe is different, because for me, I hadn't even considered the approach that you're supposed to have towards marriage. I hadn't. It wasn't even in my father's thoughts in my mind as I was making the decision to become a Muslim. But then almost immediately afterwards, those kind of things turn up. I mean, like, I had a really strange experience, because as people were finding out, especially like Muslim girls who I'd known, just personally, maybe from university or maybe even from work, treated me differently, and like, it was weird at first, and I started to become upset about it, because it was kind of like, well, it's kind of, is it revealing how people have always felt, or is it changing how people look at me? Because again, like, people made comments that, well, yeah, it's kind of obvious that you would become a Muslim because a lot of your behaviours are lean that way anyway. A lot of your philosophies and your attitudes and stances towards things lean that way anyway. But when it comes to the opposite sex, I think it's quite a different thing, because especially when you grow up quite comfortable around just people in general, you don't like the idea of treating someone different because of their sex. Just like I don't like the idea of treating someone different because of their race. And we're brought up in these kind of liberal ideals, whereas Islam has a different, not necessarily just attitudes, but actually ways of addressing these things that manifest physically. We're not supposed to be in contact. We're not supposed to really, free mixing is kind of this like, oh, can you do that, or should you be doing that kind of. And then that means that every time you talk to a girl or a woman, it's an event. It's a happening, which I've never really experienced before, and it's quite kind of daunting, because now you have to kind of be proper, less high fives, less hugs, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, now it's something that I'm having to consider looking forward, but there could be books written on what to expect when you convert.
I find the mixed marriage part of it to be a great source of joy and hilarity, because when two cultures come together, the possibilities are astounding, because you can look at her family and you can see their cultural activities, and it's fascinating. It's something that's almost like meat and drink to you, because it's palpably being able to go out and touch the culture from inside. And when I've been to Pakistan to visit her family, we've had some absolutely hilarious things when they've spoken to me about their perceptions of Britishness and their perceptions of the British as the former imperial overlords. It's a great possibility for self-discovery, And as somebody once asked me, will it be a problem, your children having two cultures? To which my simple answer was, no, it's twice the feast.
So marriage in Islam is it's a really difficult question for converts. I've been very fortunate because my situation is probably probably atypical. That my wife was the one that had the knowledge, and her family had the approach to religion that was both serious and sincere, and therefore and knowledgeable, and therefore helpful to me as a convert in terms of me understanding the Deen better and being supported in my exploration. But not culture. They were very clear that culture and Islam, and how easy it is and how dangerous it is that culture becomes the interpretation of Islam rather than Islam the arbiter and the check on cultural forms.
So the role of arts, media and communication in my conversion to Islam was a pivotal one amongst the many variables, vectors and tangents. And I'm from a hip-hop background. I was a fan and consumer of rap music. And the time period I was growing up, there were a number of rappers who happened to be either Muslim or referencing Islam in their works. So this was an initial trigger or catalyst or starting point for my exploration of Islam. So I became acquainted with the faith, ironically, through a modern urban musical art form. And I was in the music industry for a good decade, and during that time period my research into Islam was continuing in the background, and I converted in 2005, and I'm happy to say my creativity has continued to flourish even though I'm no longer in the music industry. So in my experience, Islam has opened up many avenues and doors for my artistic expression. And those pathways are informed by my beliefs. And I would say I'm someone who would like to be not necessarily defined by my faith as an artist, but I would rather say that my faith informs my art. So I try and ensure, as I did as a non-Muslim, that the content in my material is conscious, it's uplifting, it's positive. Hopefully it will inspire and inform people and educate them, but entertain them at the same time. So in many ways, what I'm doing now isn't that much different to what I was doing as a non-Muslim. Hopefully it's just better.
So, I was always into music anyway. From a young age, come from a musical home. So I used to play the piano, and then from piano I got into, when I went to high school, and I started to DJ. My older brother was DJ. So it was a natural progression from DJing to then producing. And then I started to meet a lot of guys from around London that were, not all of them were Muslim, but a fair few of them were Muslim. And so therefore, what they used to speak about in terms of their lyrics fell in line with what I used to listen to back in the day. So I then started to produce music for some of those Muslim brothers from around London. And as I say, not only Muslim, non-Muslim as well. But anyone who was speaking positive, something thought-provoking, as opposed to the negative connotations that are always associated, or often associated with hip-hop. So that was part of my journey. But as I say, I then eventually came away from music production. I no longer produce music. But a lot of my friends that I used to spend time with in the early days, they're still involved in music, and I still speak to them today.
My introduction to Islam was actually through music, and it was the music of North India. And this introduced me to the world of Mughal India. And from there I went to discover more about the art and the culture. And from there I then went on a great exploration and was privileged to be able to see the cities of Fez, of Tunis, of Cairo, of Damascus, Isfahan, Delhi, many years ago, 40, 50 years ago, when they were still very much intact. And this really was my route into Islam. I came through the beauty of the culture and of the world that was created by Islam. And through that beauty, I then came to know about the other aspects of Islam. But that was my route in. And I spent my life trying to show people that beauty at a time when religion and art and culture have been very much separated in people's minds. But one has to understand that they are completely together, they're completely one in Islam. And so when one talks about my particular understanding and route into Islam, it was through the arts.
So in terms of media representation, I would say the only positive representation of a convert that I know of is Yusuf Islam, aka Cat Stevens. Generally speaking, when I see converts on TV, it's normally a case they've been radicalized, they've been involved in extremist activity, whether, non-violent or violent. And so for me personally, that's, it's a double whammy. First, there's the negative portrayal of Muslims as a whole. Then within that, there's like a sub-genre or a sub-context, and that's the convert community being portrayed in a radicalist light, or that they're more susceptible to ideologies of violence. Of course, being a convert myself and having met so many other converts, this is a fallacy, but this seems to be the representation. And I think even within the Muslim circles, there is more this token trophy element to a convert. So if you look at converts within Muslim media, not that there should be a distinction, but inevitably there is one, you will find that they're normally, the pretty face for the camera, or this whole maybe this attractive element of somebody who left the Western world and embraced the Islamic world. Not that there's any necessarily such thing as West and East per se in this day and age, but that's one thing I've noticed with the Muslim media, that converts normally posted on like for token value trophy figures. So in both circumstances, I don't think there's a genuine positive representation of converts as a whole, like a holistic approach, something that says, okay, this is someone's life, they've gone through these steps, they've gone through an important journey, and I think there needs to be something done that's better, both in the general mainstream media and within the Muslim media circles.
With regards to media representation of Muslim converts in this country, I actually think it's quite bad. You find a number of stories that are produced. There was one that I remember, I think it was in North London, where somebody actually hacked off an elderly woman, and across one of the newspapers, tabloid newspapers, it said Muslim convert has done this crime, when the person didn't even turn out to be a convert. You also find there seems to be a concentration upon radicalization, what they deem to be radicalization. If they happen to be a convert, that's the key part they're going to focus in upon. But however, if there's successful Muslim converts who've actually contributed to society, to Britain, and they're partaking in many different projects, they won't get highlighted by the media. And that's you wonder to yourself, why do that? Why do the media have perhaps a set agenda to focus upon where they want to demonize us?
I became a Muslim in 1975, so I've been a Muslim now for 40 years, and the change in terms of people's relationship with Islam is phenomenal, because when I became a Muslim, Islam wasn't an issue, and now 40 years later it is the big issue. So it was really a very good time to become a Muslim, when I did become a Muslim, because there wasn't this kind of antagonism and fear which people have towards Islam. I think that's been the biggest change, the fundamental change.
So for me, one of the most memorable and enjoyable experiences from the symposium was meeting brothers from a wide range of backgrounds, and especially brothers from middle class and working class white backgrounds that ordinarily I would never know of and would never meet. So that was definitely refreshing. It was beautiful.
the experience of the symposium was really so positive. I'm so thankful. I mean, the time I spent there was magical in that we're so well looked after, such a warm environment, and such a blessing to be able to listen to other men who sharing about their love of the Deen, and we all felt. I felt that as men we were fortunate in that we were able to kind of not. I know we didn't have the same issues. Or having read the female narratives report, I know that our issues were different issues, and in a sense, I feel kind of. We're fortunate to be men in this sense, because although we were very aware that converts face issues and it's not easier being a convert, whether you're a man or a woman in the West, I felt that more the concerns were going into sort of like the state of the world and our position as men in Islam being leaders of the political change and responding to our place in society.
Being part of Narratives Conversion was a privilege, because I spent time with some wonderful men, and one of the key things to me throughout all the conferences, all the work, was that there was a deep core of spirituality running through it. And although we were discussing issues of fiqh and other things, and issues related to sectarianism, nonetheless, I felt throughout the whole conference that each one of the men there present had been on a spiritual journey, which was more to do with the heart than with the head.
I found the symposium down in Cambridge, it was fascinating for me because I live in a remote community, and there's really not that many more converts around here staying in Inverness. We're all spread out. Going to Cambridge and seeing so many people with all different experiences all sitting in the one room, it was really mind-opening as well, because everybody had their own journey, everyone had a different journey, and yet I could see that we were all on the same kind of journey anyway. And it was really fascinating to meet all these people, hear about some of the lives that they had, some of the problems that they had, which are different from the problems that they might have here. I've got problems with maybe of remoteness from people. They've got problems maybe where there's too many people living around them, and that becomes a problem. But it was absolutely fantastic to meet people from different backgrounds, different races, different cultures, and just see how we all got on together. And the one thing that brought us all together was Islam.